I think this is a very sad development. President Trump is the leader of NATO. If President Trump were sincerely interested in building peace in Eastern Europe, if he was interested, as I thought he was, in normalizing relations with Russia, then he would intervene to stop this. He could simply say, look, I don't agree with this, and as the leader of NATO, I'm saying stop. And if he said that to Mats would shut up and stop. But he hasn't done that. He's essentially failed miserably in his leadership of NATO as well as in leadership of the United States. He's not even capable of pursuing what's in our own interest anymore. He's incoherent. He contradicts himself. If you listen to Trump now and compare him with Trump of just 60 days ago or 90 days ago, you're dealing with entirely different people. He makes these outrageous statements about the Russians killing lots of people. Well, what does he think happens in a war, especially when the enemy begins to fall apart as the Ukrainians have? They begin to take very heavy casualties as the Russians move forward. Again, where is he in all of this? Could he play a role? Yes, he could have played a role. Now he's irrelevant.
Yeah, and I'm going to touch on that in just a second here, but I want to stick first of all on the Russian side here, because just a few days ago, Sergey Lavrov was at a conference, and he was on the stage. He was given a speech and was asked a really important question here, and his answer really took me by surprise, because from the time that Trump was inaugurated and he was making these overtures to Russia, the officials in Russia were making really politic, diplomatic, and evasive statements. See, they said they want the war to end. They want a peace. They would consider a ceasefire, all these kind of things, but they were kind of mum on what they would do. Now then, they're getting more prescriptive and direct. Here is Sergey Lavrov just a couple of days ago talking about however this thing ends, whether a negotiated settlement or a military, there is one thing they will not tolerate inside of Kiev.
Мы не можем оставить людей под властью того режима, который сейчас там находится. И если правительство, так называемое, хунта, по большому счету, Зеленского, если они рассчитывают на то, что каким-то образом будет достигнута договоренность о прекращении боевых действий, и то, что останется от Украины, будет жить по тем законам, которые они напринимали, это иллюзия. Этого допустить нельзя ни в коем случае.
For anybody who may not have been able to read that small print on there, what he said was anybody who thinks that this war is going to end under any circumstances that's going to allow the Zelensky regime and the laws that he has on there to remain in power is a complete illusion. Under no circumstances will he allow that, he said at the end. What is your reaction?
From the very beginning, President Putin has said repeatedly, we want to get at the root causes of the war. And we want to talk about solving the problems that are the root causes of this conflict. We've ignored that repeatedly. We said, oh, no, let's have a ceasefire. Let's have a ceasefire. Then we'll talk. And the point has been made over and over and over again. We're not going to agree to a ceasefire with a regime that we know will essentially utilize the ceasefire for the purpose of rebuilding its military power with the goal of ultimately keeping the war going indefinitely. Well, that was part of it. But now he's gone one step further. He's made it very clear that we're not going to leave this regime in place, because if we do, we know the regime will restart the war. And he's 100% right. Anything Zelensky says is a lie. He'll lie to say whatever he has to survive and maintain power. And then he's betting on the support of people like Mats, who are, in my judgment, fools, to provide him with weapons and money to continue his war. I don't think we understand that. How do you get at the root problem? You get at the root problem by making it clear that the regime has to go away. There needs to be a new government that is dedicated to essentially peaceful relations with its neighbors. In other words, we're not going to fight a war and then leave the Hitlerian government in power in 1945. I mean, we could have stopped at the Rhine. The Soviets could have stopped much earlier. They could have stopped along the Vistula. But what would that have done? That would have left the problem in place. The problem had to be removed. And there was great hope at the time that someone inside Germany would remove Hitler and put the Nazis out of business. That didn't happen. It hasn't happened in Ukraine. So from his standpoint, and I think this is completely justified, the regime has to change. We refuse to change it. And this is a mystery to the Russians because in their view, President Trump has the power and the influence to do so. But I think we're discovering that the CIA and their friends on the Hill and the Senate and the House, these people are far more powerful than President Trump. And so I think they've essentially written off Trump as a nice guy. We like him, but he can't accomplish anything.
Yeah, and that is part of the problem. We're going to see how that manifests a little bit more in a second. But I want one more thing on the Russian side here. I want to take a look at what Putin. So that's Lavrov's talking about politically what's going to be left regime-wise. But then in terms of the means to get there, I think Putin laid out a pretty strong case the other day that this war is about to get even more dire for the Ukraine side when he's going to open up what's effectively a northern front. He said here in this clip that he's going to have a buffer zone in the north. But when you take a look at this in a map, which you'll do in a second, you'll see that this is really just opening up a new front. Here's what Putin said.
Речь идет и о Курской области, и о Брянской, и о Белгородской областях, которые также пострадали и подвергаются обстрелам. Причем цели противник выбирает, как правило, не имеющие военного значения. Мирные объекты, дома, людей. И события сегодняшнего дня только подтверждают то, что мною было только что сказано. При налетах дронов, действиях диверсионно-разведывательных групп охотятся за гражданским транспортом, включая автомобили скорой помощи, сельхозтехнику. Гибнут и получают ранения и женщины, и дети. Уже говорил, что было принято решение о создании необходимой буферной зоны безопасности вдоль границ.
And Gary, if you can toss that map up there, this is what that buffer zone is going to look like. This in the group of north, it's about 100 kilometers in. It's not just like some of these that they're currently doing in Sumy in the north or in the Kharkiv area just north of the city, where it's a small little area here, like 10, 15 kilometers. This one is 100 kilometers in depth and goes across the breadth of the north. And in combination with what they're already doing on the entire Eastern Front, I mean, you're talking about a pretty substantial chunk of the Ukrainian forces, a country, and I don't think they have the force to do this. What does this tell you?
Well, the buffer zone that was discussed shortly before President Putin made his announcement said that the buffer zone will cover Odessa, Dnipropetrovsk, Nikolaev, Chernihiv, Kharkov, and Sumy regions. This was according to someone named Zobolev at the State Duma Defense Committee. And the Western media wrote that Russia's coming offensive after breaking through the defense of the Ukrainian armed forces will create such a zone and also capture additional territory. If I were a Russian, this is what I would do. You and I have talked about this repeatedly, and I have always pointed to the Dnieper River. Why would you not insist on the removal of all elements threatening your country, your citizens, their weapon systems, and their people from the east side of the Dnieper? Why would you leave anything there? It's a rational decision in my estimate. And again, this all happens in the aftermath of President Trump's incoherent statements, where he does a 180-degree turn. He's no longer talking about the Russians as negotiating partners and are coming to some sort of arrangement with Russia to do business. Now he's suddenly talking about, they're bloodthirsty and they're killing people. Well, you kill people in wars. There's not much choice in the matter. If you're a Russian, if you don't kill them, they're going to kill you. And I think this is all evidence for the decision that's been made in Moscow. We're going to end this war on our terms. We're not going to bet on the goodwill or sincerity of anybody in the West. because there is none.
And in terms of what Russia may be doing militarily, that was Putin talking about this this so-called buffer zone. But there are some Western publications, and actually Zelensky's been saying this himself a little bit. Here's RUSI talking about a summer offensive, and one of the big important things, and this is bigger than I think a lot of people recognize, in this they wrote, not just is an offensive coming, but Ukraine has suffered throughout this period from a shortage of troops, with recruitment still far below the level needed to maintain the force, but Russia's ability to inflict casualties on the armed forces of Ukraine was not matched by an ability to take ground. We'll talk about that in a second. But then the key part, Russian recruitment, however, has exceeded Kremlin targets for every month of 2025. Having shuffled commanders and built up reserves of equipment, Russia now is set to increase the tempo and scale of attacks. So if the Ukraine side already has a dearth of troops, they can't offset losses, and the Russians are exceeding their recruitment. I mean, what does this tell you about where the war is going on the battlefield?
Well, I think it's obvious the war is won by the Russians, has been won for quite a while, but now the unwillingness of the West to negotiate an end in good faith leaves the Russians no choice but to press the attack. They don't have any choice in the matter. What else can they do? And I think they're going to end this war probably in control of Kharkov as well as Odessa. They haven't crossed the river yet, but I think they're going to have to, because Odessa is the principal port from which Ukraine has drawn much of its weaponry and munitions and so forth. Right now, the Russians are well aware that the Polish government has about had it with Ukrainians. The 3 million plus Ukrainians living in Poland are being asked to go home. The Poles can't afford to keep them there anymore. And the Poles don't want anything to do with Russia's war against Ukraine. They don't want to oppose the Russians. They've lost several thousand Polish troops. The Russians know these things. The people who are doing all the talking and posturing are people like Merz and Macron, Starmer, and sadly Trump, people that have no skin in the game. And they know that. So they're going to ignore it all and move further west until they feel they've secured their country. I don't know why anybody is surprised by any of this. If you fail to talk to people, and we have resisted simply sitting down and talking to people, and not just talking to them, but listening to them. We have never listened to the Russians, because the people behind the scenes that elected Donald Trump and put him into the White House are the same people who are covering for Netanyahu's mass murder and expulsion of people from both Gaza and ultimately the West Bank. They want this to continue. And apparently they're in control, not Donald Trump.